This is the HR Minute podcast by AllVoices. I'm your host, Jeffrey Furman, and today we have our first major HR influencer. She is Hebba Youssef of Workweek, and she also runs the coolest newsletter in HR called I Hate It Here. Hebba, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I am the Chief People Officer at Workweek, which is a creator led media company. We put creators at the center of everything we do, B2B creators, to be clear. And I'm actually a creator as well. So I have the honor of being our Chief People Officer and a creator. And my brand is called I Hate It Here. And it's all about work and how to make work better. I also have a podcast by the same name, a community called Safe Space for HR leaders where they need to get help. There's a whole community of HR for HR and the live event series called HR Therapy, where we get on and we talk about, I bring guests on, we talk real talk about what's happening in the world of HR and what we can do as HR professionals.
That is so darn cool. Not to brag, but if I remember hearing correctly, you had over, or you currently have over 100,000 subscribers in the I Hate It Here newsletter, right?
I do. I do. It's a weight that I carry on my shoulders very seriously every day because I got to make sure that my content is hitting for them and giving them what they need to be successful. Try.
Well, no, you are not trying. You're doing an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about employee relations. We went through Reddit recently and saw on the Ask HR subreddit that HR professionals think or believe that employee relations issues are the most difficult to manage, and there's kind of been an uptick on employee relations issues post COVID. So just want to hear your thoughts about that.
Oh man, I have so many. Where do I start? I think employee relations are really tough because there's two sides to every story. And unless something is in writing, it's really hard to prove that something happened unless there were like witnesses or people in the conversation. So I think the reason why employee relations can be really difficult is depending on the amount of evidence or like things people saw happen or read happen, it's like really hard to prove them. Which I think then you don't wanna be in the position of HR to be like, "Oh, I believe this person over that person," because that's, like, really tricky and that's, like, full of bias too.
How do you get the truth out of people in these investigations when it comes to topics related around employee relations? Like you're getting all these different opinions and all these different bits of feedback and evidence. So just how do you decipher all that and say, hey, this person is the one that's telling the truth? And yeah,
Oh my god, I think it's impossible. Like, I don't know how other people do I don't know how people do it, honestly. Like, it's tough because you have to take, like, the facts that you're given at face value. And it depending on the severity of the complaint, right? There are like little complaints and there are very serious complaints. And I would say like if you have access to a lawyer or internal or external, that you should really lean on that person too, because HR people aren't we're not lawyers. We're not trained in the law of the land of everything. We know how to run an investigation because it falls under our jurisdiction. I feel like we're using a lot of legal jargon. It falls under our jurisdiction, but a lot of times, like there are laws within each state and at the federal level that we have to be mindful of that we might not know everything about. And so I think like my preferred way is to always have an anonymous way for employees to submit complaints or things that have happened to them because when they come directly to HR instantly, like then that person has just told you who they are. You have already like a layer of bias involved because if you know that person closely or you believe that person more than someone else, I just think it makes things difficult. So always having an anonymous reporting vehicle for employees to say, hey, this thing happened I don't need to tell you who I am or like I saw this thing happen or I witnessed this is super important. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about, or I want to talk a bit about artificial intelligence. You've mentioned like not knowing HR law or HR managers might not be, trained in legalese and understanding the law of the land. That said, like now you have these AI tools. I'm gonna slowly pitch in all voices here. You have like an employee relations tool that could probably help you out with those laws. Is there kind of any concern that HR folks should be having with maybe using these AI systems, or would you be scared to use them in an investigation?
You should never put any confidential information into an AI tool, especially a free one like ChatGPT. You should never put your company's name, the employee's name, the complaint. The other hard part with a tool like ChatGPT, especially the free version, like, it hasn't been updated in 2 years.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, and they're so, like, just in the law of land, they're passing pay transparency laws, like, every month. And so if this hasn't been updated in 2 years, how are you asking it any sort of relevant questions is something to think about. But then with AllVoices, if it's built into the tool and that is the purpose of the tool, I think you could trust that more than trusting a free tool that hasn't been updated and might not have actual expertise in the thing that you're asking it the questions on. I think we have a lot to learn about AI, and I say, like, what's that phrase? Trust but verify. You
Mm,
have to, like, you can trust something, but you got to verify it's true. And we've proven with AI, like, a lot of the answers ChatGPT gives you might not be true, and ChatGPT even tells you this might not be factual at the bottom. So something to think about. Something to think about. That's all I'm going to say. Like, I would never put any confidential information into a free AI tool, and I would really proceed with caution.
yeah,
It's not an expert.
absolutely. And to your point, a lot of the information could be outdated unless you have the newest system set in place. What is the best practice for obtaining anonymous feedback, and how do you decipher what is the most accurate when it comes to the feedback that you obtain?
Ooh, what a question. Best way to obtain it. I definitely think sometimes in employee handbooks you'll see things that say, like, if you need to make an HR complaint, like, reach out to or email this HR inbox or do this or do that. And it's like, hey, that's not really safe for a lot of employees. And so it has to be anonymous in a way that I would say, like, don't be asking your employees to email or even fill out a Google form. Like, really finding a tool that can help you be truly anonymous for your employees to submit things that are happening, complaints, whatever, that is really important. So, like, actually making sure it's anonymous is like step one. And then deciphering it once it comes to you. I think one of the anonymous tools that I used would have a box that said if you wanted your HR team to follow up, like, you could put your name and they could follow up. Again, then it's not anonymous, but that's always an option. And I think you're reading essentially something that somebody has submitted to you. And I say take everything with a grain of salt. And I hate the phrase assume positive intent, but I think when you're reading these types of complaints, really putting yourself in a mindset of just being as clinical as possible when you're reading it, because then you don't introduce your own feelings about something and you're able to actually better serve the employees by giving them, like, fairness, which feels impossible to achieve sometimes.
You know, the that Reddit thread that we had mentioned a little
Yeah.
bit earlier, they said that it was post COVID where like employee relations issues really started taking off. Like, why do you think that's the case? What could you assume off of that?
Okay, so I also read a survey that said, like, people of color felt safer working remotely because there were less microaggressions than when
Mm,
they're in person. So, like, harder to microaggress somebody or confuse somebody with somebody else when, like, you see their name. But I would say that I think employee relation complaints probably went up because not everybody has gone back to fully in person, right? I think most companies are hybrid. And I think with hybrid, you are now communicating through, like, a Slack or a team. And I think communication in the hybrid world is very easily misconstrued. And so you might say one thing, but really mean another. You might type something that gets misinterpreted. Someone might say, oh, they're angry when it's impossible to read tone via Slack. And so maybe the complaints have gone up in the hybrid world because we're communicating differently in the hybrid world. That'd be my.
and what do you think companies should be doing to, improve communication? Should there be some, I don't think they should probably like include it in their policy or procedures. I feel like that's a little bit too extreme, but maybe some kind of like, I don't know, 1 hour lunch and learn sessions to say, hey, this is the best way to communicate with XYZ topic. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts?
Listen, I write a newsletter, I have a podcast, and I'm online all the time trying to create content and communicate. And I would still say I could work on my communication. I think, like, everybody can work on it. No one is perfect. And the people who are like, I'm a great communicator, they're liars. They are not good communicators. They've just never had anyone tell them, I don't like communicating with you. And so I think, like, in the hybrid world, teaching people what communication actually is, how to communicate with each other is so important. And I think as employers, we could do it as early as, like, onboarding. like how we all talk to each other, what we use Slack for, what we use email for, what needs a meeting. Those are all types of communication that sometimes people intermix and do all three for one thing when really that's like not what it's meant for. I always say like Slack is like informal and updates. Email is like more formal documentation. Let's get alignment. And meetings are to get everybody on the same page and get agreement. And so those are like three different modes of communication that sometimes people do all three of those things in any of the three of them, and it all gets jumbled. And that's when I think relationships start to deteriorate and probably complaints start to happen.
One last question about culture building.
Mm.
I remember listening to one of the vlogs you were in yesterday, and you had mentioned that at Workweek, you encourage a culture, like I guess within Slack, where they don't necessarily have to be active participants in every Slack group. You just kind of you can be as involved as you want to be. It's not a forced culture. It's pretty much one that whatever you want to give in, you could give in. Just make sure you communicate key points when it comes to certain projects. And if you want to talk about, I don't know, movies, video games, you could have those things. Is that kind of like the best lesson or the best way companies should be utilizing these tools? Like make it so that culture isn't necessarily something that's forced. It's something that you could participate in it, but at the end of the day, we're all just working here.
Do you remember like growing up in elementary school where they would like make you run the mile? Do you remember that? And they like
Yeah.
forced you to do that and everyone hated it. No one wants to be forced to do anything. And we like carried that into our adulthood at work. And so when you're thinking about how do you build connection and culture at a company, I always tell people think about how you're building a community or a neighborhood. In a neighborhood, like you're not forced to be friends with your neighbors. You're really not. Might you like go over there and be like, hey, I need a cup of sugar or some flour or like whatever. I can't get it on Amazon. I got to go borrow it now. Can you watch my kid, take him to the bus stop? Like you should think about companies and cultures like that. People have the option to do more with people, bond with them, share more about themselves. And other people want the option to not do that. And the second you start forcing people to do it is the second like people are going to resent you. Just like I resented my PE teacher for making me run the mile. I mean, did it help me in later in life? Yes. Like now I can run a mile, but I didn't like it when it was happening. And like your employees, the thing that they see through the fastest, and I tell everybody this is like they can sniff bullshit a mile away. So if you are telling them like we're all friends here, we're gonna all be in Slack talking to each other, they're gonna be like, nah, that's not the case. There are side DMs, there are side chats, conversations are happening not in these public channels. So I just say giving your employees the option to pick what best serves them is the best way you get engagement.
And yes, that is awesome. This was a great podcast. I'm
That's what it was.
so I'm excited to publish this one. I'm gonna edit this part.
Obviously, I mean, or we just leave this in, or we're just chitty
Or
chat.
or we'll just leave it. You know what? I'm gonna leave it in just because I want people to see how excited I got.
I think the hard part about investigations, I include this or not include this, just like one last note is like HR should a lot of times have the power to act on the things that employees report, but sometimes we are stuck. And
Mm.
that is very scary, and I don't think a lot of HR people talk about it because they don't want employees to think they're totally powerless. We're not powerless, but there are times where things overcome like, where decisions get made above our decisions that we can't always control, and that's tough. And, like, we're not work is, like, not a court. Like, we don't have a jury, a judge and jury. It's just, like, HR and legal trying to do their best to, like, solve a problem, and that's hard. And nobody wants to fire like, I'll say this again, and you could stick this in there, like, if you're getting major complaints about, like, your top seller, and you have to go tell your executive team and your CEO, like, "I need you to fire this person because we have a lot of complaints against them." I think a CEO who's focused on making profit is gonna have a really hard time saying, I'm gonna go do that," unless the reports are very severe, like, they've done something very terrible and there's hard evidence about it. And that makes me feel like morally, it's really hard to do this job and do employee relations sometimes. I mean, like all employees will tell you, like, HR is there to serve the company. And I'm like, hey, I am here to serve the company, but that does not mean I'm going to let people harass you and abuse you. That is where I draw like a very hard line. Like I will not stand for that as a people ops person, as an HR person who deeply cares about the human experience, if the complaints and the things that are being made are about an employee being abused or harassed, like, absolute full stop, absolutely not. That has to stop. But like, that's not the case that a lot of employees have felt. And so we get this rep that HR is there to protect the company. And I'm like, I'm here to help the company. I'm also here to help you. That's it. Boom. Mic drop.
Where could our audience reach you? What is the best, way to find you online?
Oh God, I'm on LinkedIn.
Don't worry, we'll put all the links to where they could find you on in the description. That said, you are doing a lot of great things. Keep on fighting the good fight and creating amazing content. We really love what you do here. And yeah, look forward to having you on again.
Same. Can't wait to come back. Also look forward to having you on the I Hate It Here podcast. We're gonna do it.
Yes. All
Okay.
right. That
John.
concludes this episode.